Hi, we're just going to wait a second to let people start trickling in. Feel like every Zoom conversation starts the same. We're just going to wait. I hope it's beautiful wherever you are. It's been hot here. It's been cold here. It's been snowy in the distance here. And today it's mowing the lawn weather. So who knows?
You definitely never know.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what season it is or what it's going to be. But I do know that today we have an amazing presentation and an opportunity to hear from Natalie. We were just chatting earlier how difficult it is to take, big ideas and then just kind of put it out in a way that can be shared. But one of the things I love about the MOI community too is that this is the place for big idea people that we so we can connect this way and we don't have to have all the pieces. But Natalie, thank you so much for taking time. This is part 2 in the 4-part series, and everything is recorded and archived. So if you missed part 1, you can go back and watch it. But thrilled to have you here today, Natalie. And I'm going to let you kind of jump in and start telling what direction we're going to go today.
Hey, sounds good. Marley was just saying how we were talking about how it's really hard to take all of these ideas that I have just been studying and pondering and trying to apply in my life for the last 20 years and try and get it into some kind of verbal format that I can communicate what's in my head. And so really just say a prayer for me and a prayer for all of us that the message that I am still trying to find words for will be clear, at least to our hearts, because that's the only thing that really matters is what our hearts are understanding, right? So last time I told you the story of how I have really drawn lessons from working with horses my whole life, because the working with horses really helped me see the importance of learning to yield to my Father in heaven, and to figure out that sometimes revelation isn't going to feel natural or normal. It's going to be a challenge, and that there's going to be some things that we're going to have to yield to that will feel difficult for us in the beginning when we're learning, but that will create something amazing and beautiful ultimately. And in today's presentation, I want to talk about practicality. Firstly, because a lot of people had a lot of questions about it at the end of last meeting, and then also in messages afterward, because really when it comes down, this concept of practicality, I think, is a really big concern on people's hearts and minds. And it took me a long time to really come to terms with it, because I was a very practical child. I had very practical parents, and that's not a criticism. In some ways, considering the practicality really helps. But the one thing that I do want to clarify, when we were talking the end of last time, I'm actually just going to share my screen here so you can see what I'm talking about going forward. And I'll put this in presentation mode. But essentially, what I really wanted to share with this is, while we're talking about beauty and while we're talking about practicality and how they influence and affect one another, and how really, really throwing ourselves into beauty requires that uncomfortable, unnatural yielding process, at least at first anyway, that it really is still something that we can master. But I do want to clarify, like I was mentioning before, at the end of our last group gathering together, I was sharing a lot of books about, like, yes, if we learn beauty, it can be really practical. And we can actually help our kids to bless the world, whatever field that they go into. And I get excited about that because it's true, but I still wanted to clarify and come back that the real why that we learn beauty is to live lives of maximum joy. And at the same time, we don't have to sacrifice. It's not like practicality will suffer if we put beauty and joy and God and yielding first. It will not suffer. In fact, if anything, it will be the opposite. You will actually bless your children to become more effective in whatever career that they choose to go into, if they are developing their skills of being able to be soft-hearted and connected with the arts. So we're just going to be talking about priorities today. And in order for you to understand, I'm actually going to come very strongly from the direction of an industrial designer. That is my degree. And like I mentioned last time, I have spent years kind of unlearning everything that I learned in school. So this was kind of like this quote right here by Louis Sullivan. He was an American architect in the early 1900s. He was basically, you know, the internet calls him as that, they say he's regarded as the spiritual father of modern American architecture. And like he's identified with the aesthetics of the early skyscraper design. So he did a lot of these first buildings that just are kind of stark and straight up and just very functional. And his motto was form follows function. And this was the motto that I heard repeated over and over and over and over in design school: form follows function. And what I heard when we said this over and over and over again was that function is what really matters. And if you get the function right, then the form will take care of itself. That's what I heard. And that's not necessarily what it means. In application, what it really means is to make sure you design products in a way that like complement the purpose of the product and then make using it just really seamless and comfortable. So I have some examples here that I just grabbed off the internet really quick so you could see what I was saying. You can see in the top left hand, she has some red regular nail polish, and then she has some purple nail polish that she got from Korea. And she was really enamored with the purple because you can see when you roll it, it's actually a flat brush as opposed to a round brush. And she says it's so much easier to paint your nails and it just makes it so obvious. And it's one of those products that you just can't imagine living without because it made painting her nails so much easier. So she talked about how this was a really great use of the theme, the rule of form follows function, because the form made the function better. So the form served the function. The function got easier because you could paint your nails better and with less mistakes with a flat brush as opposed to a round one. So, and then she also highlighted another product, this little, and this one is funny. You'll never how much this costs. So she was just saying how much she loved this product because it had a curved handle. So it curved with her thumb, and it had this little well on the top so that if she missed the water, it would go into the pot instead of flowing outward, and how she could just tell the designer had really thought about her and her experience using the plant water. And I just kind of laugh because this is like design school religion here. Like, try and find the little problems of using something simple and make it better, and people will pay you extra for your design. So I just want to give you an idea of how much people will pay for design. This little pot that she has right here that she's just exclaiming the virtues of, it costs $198 because of these wonderful design elements. I found, just out of sheer curiosity, I went to Amazon.com, and for $18.99, I can get a pot that I actually think has a more comfortable handle. And the top doesn't have a little tiny hole. It has a really big hole, so the whole opening is in. So you don't need a well to guide the water because you have a big enough hole to get in. So I'm just telling you, I was inundated with this stuff in design school. And I used to think like, oh, this is like the best thing, and you could build these products. But the whole time through design school, I just felt so uncomfortable and I couldn't put a finger on it. And it's been because of what we'll talk about soon. So I'll just tell you, this little spoon, she was extolling the virtues of the spoon because you didn't need a saucer to set it on when it was dirty, when you were, messy because you were cooking with it. You could just set it down on the counter and it would take care of itself. Unless, of course, you have any food on it and it weighs it down and then it's heavier. I don't know how heavy this part of the handle is, but that was what I thought when I saw her set it down. I'm like, yeah, it doesn't have any food on it yet. Just wait till you have some cookie batter on there and then suddenly it's not going to be even anymore. So, I mean, I'm just telling you, I'm coming from this perspective, right, of feeling like I had to design these products that were brilliant and creative, that would make, that the purpose was super important, and that whatever the form was after that didn't really matter. And the goal was always to sell more products, make life easier at the lowest cost possible. That was always the goal. And in hindsight, I look at that goal and I'm like, yeah, I'm not really sure I want that to be my mantra for my life. I'm not really sure that making life easier is necessarily always the best. I'm not really sure that spending the least amount of money is always the best. And I'm also not sure that I want to spend my life worrying about whether I can sell more products. So I really don't want to disparage the design world in general, because I have great professors. I like them. I'm not here to be critical. It was just that I knew at the end of the day that something was missing. That's all. Something was missing. And oh, I want to give you this one last example. So Frank Lloyd Wright was a student of Louis Sullivan. And he actually changed the motto a little bit from form follows function to form and function are one. So he wanted them to be one together. And this was one of his best, longest standing examples of that. So if you follow the red arrow, this is the Guggenheim Museum. I don't know if any of you have been there in person, but you go up the elevator, and then you follow this spiral roadway, I guess, or hallway, all the way down to the main floor. And while you're spiraling, you're looking at art. So this is an art museum, a modern art museum. And when you're walking down this spiral, you can see art as you go. And it's just supposed to be this seamless, comfortable, you're not even thinking about it. You don't have to navigate stairs. You don't have to go up. You don't have to go room to room. You don't get disoriented. You're literally walked from beginning to end through this art museum. And this is what it looks like from the inside at completion. And maybe some people, there are some elements here that I look up and I'm like, wow, that actually kind of looks cool. And it follows some, Frank Lloyd Wright really prided himself in following harmonies of nature and trying to follow proportions of nature. And there are a few areas where I think, well, in some senses, he kind of got that right. It almost looks like a beautiful seashell or something. But in reality, in using this museum, and I've heard some other people talk about when they were in there, they felt this way, that it kind of feels like you're in a fishbowl. So you have no privacy when you're pondering the art. And you see everybody else around there. And one gal even said, I actually like to go to the Guggenheim to watch people instead of the art. And it did create a different kind of experience. It was just a different kind of experience. But his goal was to make this seamless form follows function kind of idea, or form and function are one. This kind of idea of trying to move people through without having to make choices, without having to think as much, so they could put all of their attention on the art. Now, obviously, we probably all have a very similar idea of modern art. I'm not a huge fan of it myself. I have lots and lots of philosophical rabbit holes I could go down here. So I'm not extolling this as necessarily a virtue. Please don't say that we want things to be like this, but this is a good example of how I personally continued to feel uncomfortable with what I was being taught. This museum experience would feel really uncomfortable to me. I wouldn't be able to, even if that was absolutely beautiful art on the walls, I would feel almost exposed when I was having a personal reaction to a painting. I don't know. It wouldn't be conducive to me. So this one last quote from a guy, Leduc. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. He also was a major influencer for Louis Sullivan, who then influenced Frank Lloyd Wright. A rationally designed structure may not necessarily be beautiful, but no building can be beautiful that does not have a rationally designed structure. Now, I don't know about you, but I would argue with that. I'm not really sure that that is true. Something can be beautiful in opposition to rationality. So this is another quote that I want to go back to, and I want to ask you what you think it means. It's by a guy, he wrote The Picture of Dorian Gray. He was a poet and a playwright. And he said this quote that kind of rocked the art world for a little while. All art is quite useless. So totally stark opposition, right? Totally stark opposition to all of these form follows function. The practical part is the most important part. And then the beauty can come after that if you have any beauty, but most of all, we're just worried about the practicality of it. All art is quite useless. So I want to go down, I'm going to ask you a trick question. I'm calling it a trick question because it really does have a secret right answer. I don't know about you. I hate it when teachers have like a secret right answer. So they're like, what do you think about this? And no matter what you say, it's like not exactly what he wants to tell the class, right? I know, I'm sure you've had that experience. But I want you to think for a minute. There is a right answer, and it's only right because he actually wrote a letter to his friend explaining what he meant by all art is quite useless. So there's only a right answer because he's the one who knew what he meant. But I don't know if any of you would be willing, but I am curious to invite you to unmute yourself and try and answer this question, because I'm curious what your thoughts are before I keep going with it. So I stopped the screen share, right? Nobody can see my screen. You can't see the secret right answer on the next couple slides. Okay, good. All right, who's brave enough to come off your mic and tell me what you think Oscar Wilde might have meant, or what this phrase could mean to you? There really isn't a secret right answer. We'll get to what Oscar Wilde did mean, but I'm curious what it means to you. So there is no right answer.
I'll be brave. I was thinking that his choice of words might be deliberate, in that he didn't say that art doesn't have value or purpose, just that it was useless. And so if I think of things that are useful in the opposite sense, I don't necessarily use art in a practical way. You know, if we're talking about practicality versus beauty, useless in the sense that it's not practical, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have value.
Correct. I really like how you use the word value. Value and use are two different things, aren't they? Something can have a lot of value and not necessarily have like some task practical use. Okay, you are right on, Kyra. You're right. You gave the secret right answer. So let me tell you what I found, actually, because I think it's funny how people interpreted this quote, because I went on Reddit just to see. You know, you're going to get a variety of answers on Reddit, right? But I just wanted to see what other people thought this quote meant. And this is what one guy said. Traditionally, art is useless, but politically it can change or influence minds. It can change who you are. And I thought that was funny because of my experience with the modern art world. It is very much used as a political platform to communicate some activist idea. That is largely what art does these days in all modern art museums. But I found that really funny because it's actually, this is the actual letter that Oscar Wilde wrote to his friend. So we actually do know exactly what he meant with the quote, because he explained it to his friend as follows. My dear sir, art is useless because its aim is simply to create a mood. It is not meant to instruct or to influence action in any way. So all those political activists, you're not doing art, according to Oscar Wilde. It is superbly sterile, and the note of its pleasure is sterility. Oh, let me share my screen. I realized I wasn't doing that. I will share this one and then put it up. So it is superbly sterile, and the note of its pleasure is sterility. If the contemplation of a work of art is followed by activity of any kind, the work is either of a very second-rate order, or the spectator has failed to realize the complete artistic impression. So he actually feels like you have second-rate art if you have some kind of agenda. He says a work of art is useless in the same way that a flower is useless. A flower blossoms for its own joy. We gain a moment of joy by looking at it. That is all that is to be said about our relations to flowers. Of course, man may sell the flower and so make it useful to him, but this has nothing to do with the flower. It is not part of its essence. It is accidental. It is a misuse, and this is, I fear, very obscure, but the subject is a long one. So that's the end of his letter. But I thought that was a really fascinating way to look at the usefulness of beauty, when beauty itself is its own thing. It doesn't have to be useful. I'm sure you guys have heard, there's lots of studies out there. These two scientists did a big, what do they call it? A meta study. They gathered all these studies together, and they had really, honestly, objectively measurable data that suggested that people recover more quickly if their environment is beautiful. So you know, for those patients, for example, that would look out to a brick wall versus the patients who had a park with beautiful trees out their walls, they actually required fewer. Those with the beautiful view required fewer painkillers than those with just the sterile brick wall view. So it is measurable. It is measurable that people are influenced, their mood, their optimism, their healing is influenced by what they surround themselves with, by whether or not they see something beautiful. So there's a video by Roger Scruton. It's called Why Beauty Matters. And it is one of my favorite films. I would say this movie and one other were majorly instrumental in fundamentally changing the way that I looked at beauty. He makes such an incredibly good argument in this video about why beauty matters, but I'm going to share some photos, some screenshots of one of the arguments that he makes, and I'm going to focus mostly on architecture because Louis Sullivan was an architect, Frank Lloyd Wright was an architect. We have a lot of architecture, and you know, homes are very practical. It's where we live, so it's a great kind of data point, if you will, to explain why I believe that beauty really does matter. So this is an example that he gave of just concrete, industrialized. Everybody's home looks the same, and how life just degrades in this. And he shares, this is Roger Scruton, he shares several pictures, several backdrops of areas that have been defaced. Nobody cares about them anymore. And they don't care about them because they're ugly. People don't care about ugly things, no matter how useful they were when they were first built. They don't care about them. They degrade them, they deface them, they destroy them. They inspire acts of ugliness because they themselves, the architecture itself, is ugly. It is dilapidated, not because it wasn't at one time useful, but because it is ugly and people don't really care how useful it is. They don't want to be there. And over, he has all of these images. I love this one because he has in this backdrop, can you see my mouse? Maybe you can, maybe you can't. But in the backdrop, you can see, in the background, you can see this large building being demolished. It's a big, huge apartment building that is being demolished. And in the foreground, we have this beautiful, who knows how old church, right? A church that probably didn't have, updated electrical and functioning bathrooms when it was built, right? But it is still standing. All of these awesome brick, well-designed, comfortable, beautiful homes are outlasting the new, the fancy, the practical. And he kind of starts asking this question. He's wandering around all of these beautiful buildings and wondering why they're so well cared for, right? Even though they're way older than these buildings that are being demolished. And he gives another example to make his point. Hold on just one second. I'm going to hop off audio because I'm going to ask my kids. They're vacuuming in the other room. Just a second.
I love the reality of our lives that come through. Somebody vacuuming in the back.
All right, sorry.
I was laughing about that too, Natalie. That's wonderful that we can be so real here and be moms and share and all these beautiful things at the same time.
Can you guys hear all the vacuuming back there? Okay, good. Maybe it was just me. So anyway, he shares about Poundbury, and I looked at Poundbury after I had watched the video, and I learned a little bit about this area. It was by Leon Creer. He's an architectural designer. And I want to give you a little challenge for when you think this might have been built. It's in, I believe, in England. I'm probably going to get that wrong because my memory doesn't serve me very well all the time, but just look how beautiful those are. Restful to the eye, harmonious angles, designs, real materials. And anybody who designs anything knows that a curve is always more expensive than, a rectangle. A steep roof is always more expensive than a flat one. These archways and columns are obviously going to be more expensive than you know, just a steel beam. What year, if you had a guess, was Poundbury planned and actually created? Have a guess. You don't have to say it out loud, just in your mind. It was actually, can you imagine? This was conceived and designed and built in the late 80s and early 90s. Is it just me? That doesn't look like late 80s and early 90s, does it? Because it's beautiful. And the 80s and 90s were not beautiful. There was nothing classical or harmonious about the 80s and 90s architecture, right? But this is when Poundbury was built, because their goal was not to slap something up quickly. Let's go back to the 1950s, even before the 80s and 90s. This is what we have. Westwood Lake. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, screen porch, only $7,450. Pretty bonkers, huh? You can tell what their goal was. Their goal was practicality, get all these war veterans back from the war, get them in their own homes, have them start families. We just need to have something, and it needs to be up, it needs to be quick, it needs to be fast, it needs to be cheap. And I'm not necessarily saying that is a bad thing, but how many neighborhoods have you seen with houses like this that are just in complete shambles? How many people have really, really continued to lovingly care for the houses that looked like this when they were built? They were very, very practical when they were built, but not very many of them lasted very long before they look gosh darn awful, right? I know I would much, much, much rather live in Poundbury than in Westwood Lake. Thank you. So this was the quote that Roger Scruton ended with after showing a lot of these examples of architecture. He said, if you put usefulness first, you lose it. But if you put beauty first, then what you do will be useful forever. It turns out that nothing is more useful than the useless. I found that a really fascinating thought, and I think I had a few typos in there, so forgive me, but I found that a really useful thought, that the priority matters. We need useful things in our lives. We need practical things in our lives. We do. But if we lead with practicality and beauty is secondary, we can actually end up losing everything that we've built because people don't care to take care of it. However, if we put beauty first, especially the kind of beauty that points us towards God, we will be able to maintain the practicality at the same time. You don't kill practicality with beauty. And yes, there are some things that have no practical use whatsoever, but we have them on our walls because beauty is first, because it actually is important to have something beautiful on our walls for our own spirits to ponder and think about, and for our children. This right here is, there was a little story. I was talking about this at a homeschool conference probably 15 years ago. And I shared the importance of beauty there. And I had this little gal, her name was Dana. And she just came up to class afterwards and she told me, you know, like I had never really thought about any of this stuff. I never really realized how important beauty was. And she said, I'm going to do something different. And she actually contacted me later and said, you know what, Natalie, I went to this little art and craft fair and I never do this. I never spend extra money on handmade things, but she saw this butter dish that just was beautiful. It was handmade. It was clearly something that somebody had put a lot of love into, and it brought her joy. It just brought her joy. And so she spent the extra money. She's like, I never spend extra money on design stuff, but I just felt like I really wanted this butter dish. So she spent money on it. And she said, you know, it is the funniest thing. Every time I go to use my butter to butter some toast, whatever it is, I get a little boost of joy. And it wasn't because it served a practical purpose first. It was because it was beautiful first. And then it served a practical purpose. And she just said every day she gets a little boost of joy because of this butter dish. And she just told me how grateful that she was that I had talked about that, because she never would have thought of that and she would have been missing out on the joy. So I would encourage you to take time, take money. I know it's hard to spend money, but if we only spend our money on beautiful things, on practical things, we're missing out on the joy that can come from spending money on beautiful things. I love this teaching. I have a dear friend who was born in Iran. She speaks Farsi, she's Persian, and they believed in the Baha'i religion, which is illegal now in Iran, and they were being persecuted. And so when she was 11 years old, she left and came and moved to Utah. And I just was trying to learn about other religions. I thought the Baha'i was a very fascinating one, and I sought her out and we became friends. And she says here, this is a quote from Abdul Baha, who is a person that they consider to be their greatest prophet. They actually considered him to be Christ returned as his second coming, Christ. So they think he's a great, great leader. And he said this: art is worship. The more thou strivest to perfect it, the closer wilt thou come to God. What bestowal could be greater than this, that one's art should be even as the act of worshiping the Lord? That is to say, when thy fingers grasp the paintbrush, it is as if thou wert at prayer in the temple. I love that quote. That is exactly what I feel like creation and creativity do for us. They draw us nearer to the divine. We not only worship him, but we can hear his voice as he helps us when we are creators of beauty in our own environment. And you'll notice that there is nothing in here, nothing about practicality. So I want to share next Luke 12:27 through 31. We are really familiar with 27. Consider the lilies, how they grow. They toil not, they spin not. And yet I say unto you that Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. If then God so clothed the grass, which is today in the field, and tomorrow is cast into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O ye of little faith? Seek not what ye shall eat, or what ye shall drink, neither be ye doubtful of mind, for all these things do the nations of the world seek after, and your Father knoweth that ye have need of these things. But rather seek ye the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added unto you. So again, I read this scripture and it is like glaringly in my face. This is where our priorities need to be. It doesn't mean, he's not saying you don't need the practical stuff. That's not what he's saying. But he is saying, put God first, put beauty first, put inspiration first, put our hearts first, and everything else will fall into place. It will. He's promising that. The flowers in the field. And here's another thing. Just think about the lilies. I looked it up just because I was curious. How many lilies? How many different kinds of lilies are there? The estimate that I looked up was 2,000. There is Zippo, practical purpose in God creating 2,000 different varieties of lily. Zippo. There is only one reason that he would do that, and it's because it's beautiful, and because it's inspiring, and because it uplifts us. And all the nutrients the lilies need to grow, he provides it. All the practical things that lilies have to have in the soil, for their, for what's the word I'm looking for? The green. I keep wanting to come up with chloroform, but that's not it. Anyway, everything that makes the colors of the green, everything that makes the colors of the flower, the sunshine, all of it is provided by God. The practical stuff is in his hands. But it is clear what is more important to him. And not only do we have all of those lilies, but some people really like succulents. Some people really like roses. Some people like forget-me-nots. We have the variety is just astounding that he gives us. for no other reason than just beauty. This is something, regardless of what your religion is, if you want to think this was written by a guy that lived in the 1800s, that's fine. You can think that. For me, I feel like it was a guy talking for God. And I have pondered and pondered and pondered on this scripture again and again and again, because to me, it is the epitome, the absolute epitome of how we achieve beauty. And again, thou shalt not be proud in thy heart. Let all thy garments be plain, and their beauty the beauty of the work of thine own hands. And this is why I wanted to do a class on creation and creativity. I'm not saying you have to paint every painting on your wall. That's not what I'm not interpreting this to mean that. And in fact, I kind of wondered about, like, what does plain mean? Does it mean we can't have little Victorian scrolls anywhere in any of our art? Does it all have to be like kind of minimalist and simple? But I looked up plain in the 1828 dictionary, which is when this is written. So this is what plain would have meant in 1828. Plain, or they actually didn't even have the word plain. They only had plainly, but it meant without cunning or disguise. It meant without ornament or artificial embellishment. It meant it was frankly, honestly, and sincerely, such as like deal plainly with me. So deal frankly, deal honestly, deal sincerely with me. It meant in earnest or fairly. It meant in a manner to be easily seen or comprehended. It meant just being evident and clear and not obscure. Have you known people that kind of dress in a way that would disguise something? Maybe disguise their actual financial situation. Maybe they're kind of covering things up. Maybe they're trying to outdo someone else. Maybe it's easy to kind of put on something with a little bit of bling so we feel extra special. I think that's kind of what it's talking about by plain. I don't think it's saying if you've created a necklace that you really enjoy and you like the beads and you like the shine and you like the texture and the color, I don't think he's saying don't ever embellish anything. I don't think he's saying don't ever put an ornament on anything. He's saying don't do it artificially, which I think is a totally different thought. Don't do it artificially. Do something that is honest, that is sincerely you. Be you in the way that you dress, be you in the way that you decorate your house. Be sincere about what you love and what you think is beautiful. Be honest about what connects you with a feeling of beauty and with God. And don't just do something just because it's on Pinterest or because it's cutesy. Put it up there because you mean it. Put it up there because it is a representation of what you love, the work of your hands. Think about what goes on your walls. Think about what goes on your body for your clothes. Think about how you dress, how you decorate, how you create a home, and make it sincere and honest and open. One of the best, in my home, obviously, I do have paintings of my own on my own walls, and I only have bare walls because I would rather have a bare wall. You can see I'll take off the screen share. I have a bare wall behind me because I have a really big plan of what I'm going to put there, but I haven't had time to do it yet. But I would rather have a bare wall than just slap something up there just to call it decoration. I would rather have a reminder of what I'm going to put there. It's going to be a big timeline that I'm working on. Maybe I should prioritize that and get it up so you can see what I mean. But I do have bare walls. I've never been in a hurry. I would so much rather have something really, truly that inspires me on my walls that I really want there than just put something up to fill space and make it look even. It's my personality. I've been really, really slow about decorating every home I've ever lived in. I've been really slow because I'm very, very intentional about everything that I put up and in my home. So, because it's important to me, and I really would rather have a blank wall than have a wall that it wasn't well thought through and well felt, wasn't something that was really representative of me. And probably the best compliment I've ever received, and oddly enough, is people say the same thing multiple times. I've been told if anybody describes my home, And it's made me so happy that they're all using the same word, because it's really what I'm going for. And they'll walk in and they'll say, your home feels really peaceful to me. And it's like, oh, good. Because I got a lot of chaos up here and I have a lot of chaos in here. And I knew I do need my home to support a feeling of peace when sometimes life gets messy and reality isn't super peaceful. But you have the power to put in the work of thine hands, so to speak. You have the capacity and the ability to influence the feeling in your home, which is what Oscar Wilde said was really the only purpose of art, was to influence the feeling in your home. And even though I'm coming from the perspective of a trained industrial designer, and even though I'm coming from the perspective of I'm using architecture a lot in our homes and the way we dress as kind of an example of this, it extends into education and everything that Marlene teaches, everything that she shares, because the storytelling, the dance, the music, everything can support a feeling of beauty in the home. And that is the backbone. And when we put it first, when we put that heart first, the mind really does take care of itself. The practical parts, the studious parts, the facts, the information that they need to have to do whatever job they need to do, it really does come. And it is secondary and should be secondary. And the beauty and the heart really is and does and should be the first, the absolute priority. So we have a few minutes left, about 15 minutes. I wanted to leave a little time for questions or thoughts or anything that you thought you might feel like sharing. Anybody want to jump on?
It's been lots of nodding in the background and a few comments of just agreement with what you're saying.
Oh, I haven't read any of the chat. Let me go through here.
There's not too much in there, Natalie.
Oh,
Lori,
okay.
that's usually means we're listening with rapt attention.
Lori says, yes, I have several beautiful bowls and plates that I've purchased secondhand, and it makes my heart so happy every time I use them. Yes, so I use them regularly. I've seen people online that really get into like minimalism, and they have their plates for every day that the kids can break, and then they have their really pretty plates and they never use them. And they've come to this full circle of realizing, I need to use my pretty plates. That's the whole point of them. So they'll get rid of the junky, ugly ones and they'll use the pretty ones every day. And if they break, they break. In fact, Dana's little butter dish, I followed up with her a few years later. I said, how'd your butter dish do? And she said, oh, it broke. But that's okay, right? Because that means it got used and loved for as long as it lasted. And yeah, I mean, I love that. What's the word of that Japanese or Chinese? Oh, I'm going to botch it. When they use the gold glue and they glue everything back together and it becomes more valuable after it's been broken. So like if a beautiful piece of china breaks, does anybody know what that's called?
I know what you're talking about. I don't know the name.
It's like Kugatsuki or something like that. I just can't remember. But yeah, this idea that things are beautiful. But if you think about a beautiful piece of pottery, if it breaks and you throw it away, that's fine. But if it breaks and you decide to preserve it with this method, you would only preserve it if it's beautiful. And how many times have people traveled to Italy and they walk down these streets with really old, beautiful homes that were built ages ago that never had, the electrical or the plumbing or anything updated, but people have cared for them so well because they're just beautiful. And they can add the plumbing and electrical later as things update. You can always add the practicality later. But when you start with the beauty, when you lead with the beauty, it makes something last so much longer than some nasty, ugly 1970s apartment building that gets destroyed 20 years later, right? Beauty makes things last.
I still just think that idea, I'm just seeing how it's true in my own life that beauty begets more beauty, and that ugliness brings more ugliness. And I can just see that is a universal truth in little things and big things. But it kind of supports that. Put a little tablecloth on the table, like just get out some cloth napkins once in a while, or they're just these tiny little things we talk about in Life Giving Home a lot, that that are just small, but in physical things, but also in the intangible things, that our faces are the way we're holding our face or our countenance is going to beget more. That's probably not the right word.
Oh, I love that idea. Yeah. I mean, that's the definite work of your own hands too, right? How you're presenting the work of your own face. I love that quote by Sherry Dew that when you're 14, you have the face that you were born with. When you're 40, you have the face that you deserve. We do create the world with our face. The only bummer for me is that my concentration face looks an awful lot like my angry face. So I concentrate a lot. So maybe I'm going to make my 40-year-old face looks kind of angry and wrinkly. That's okay.
I don't want to call anybody out. Nicole, oh, I was going to ask you, Nicole, if you had something to say. I could see you leaning in, but you're giving me a look like, nope, I've got nothing.
Sorry, I was just talking to my daughter.
Okay, good. But I can see Candace has raised her hand. Natalie, is it all right if we go to Candace?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Hi, sorry, I'm not on camera, but I just wanted to say really quick that I love the idea of, yes, putting art up on your walls and everything and putting things up that make you happy, because I've never actually, not until this year, have I really done that. And it's because of Well-Educated Heart and the Simple Beauty paintings are actually paintings I really love. Or no, Simple Joy art. And so I have now started taking like the Jesus picture and like nature pictures, and I would go to Walmart and just have them blown up a bit. One second, okay. And anyway, so now I have like beautiful things in my home, and when people, kind of like what you were saying, now I have all these compliments when people come over, they're just like, oh, like your house just feels so good, and I just love your paintings, and I've never had that before, and it's like, oh, like it's interesting how, yeah, when you're authentic, putting things that you love up on the walls, people can feel it. So anyway, thank
They
you so
can.
much
They can
for
feel it.
everything you shared.
Thank you so much for adding that, because it's nice when you hear more than just your own experiences. It really does make a difference. People can feel a difference when they're around you and when they're in your home. I went in this woman's home once. She was one of my really early, she hired me to do a painting of her dogs actually. And so I went over to her house and I could tell that she just loved original artwork. She had it all over her walls. And I remember being really, really puzzled because she was showing me the artwork through her whole house, and she brought me upstairs, and she had most of her artwork was on the main floor, and then she had a little bit upstairs. But I noticed that I wasn't seeing any photographs of family, nowhere. And I asked her about that until I got upstairs, and then she had like these little tiny pictures on like a bookshelf, but it wasn't like a whole wall with a big family photo. And I remember like kind of scratching my head because that's like the standard thing, right? When you walk in somebody's house, you have this big photo of their family. And my first thought was, well, she's not really prioritizing her family. She's prioritizing these artworks. And this was just as I was barely beginning to not even call myself an artist. I would only say I was a portrait painter because I still couldn't like even own the idea of being an artist. And I remember leaving feeling a little bit confused and thinking that her priorities were backwards. But then I have pondered about her house so many times since, and I've actually come to a point where I've modeled mine after hers. All of my family photos are upstairs in my master closet or my master bedroom. And that's where I enjoy my family and my personal space. But when I invite other people into my home, they meet my real children and my real family, as opposed to a picture of us. And then they see things on the wall that are deeper, that they can ask about. What does this mean? Or how did you come up with this idea? And it starts conversations in ways that family photos never have for me. So it's been, I've often looked back on that and just thought, that was such a neat little lesson that she gave me. She didn't even realize she was giving me that lesson. And at first I wasn't ready for the lesson. At first I was like, man, her priorities are backwards. And now I'm like, no, her priorities were right on. It doesn't mean that she wasn't emphasizing or loving her family. It meant that she was sharing she was sharing beauty with her family instead of having them kind of focused on that sounds bad if you guys have pictures of family on your wall. I don't want you to feel like you're focusing on your family, but it's kind of like a selfie on the wall, right? And she didn't have any of that. It was, we focused on beautiful things in this home, and they did. So I just thought that was really inspiring. Any other thoughts to add? Okay. Well, next time we are going to be talking about, if you do have thoughts, sometimes I don't wait long enough on Zoom. I know it takes people a minute to find their button for coming on to audio. So if you have a thought, just jump in or raise your hand. But the two other lessons that were very significant for me, I'm going to talk about chaos. The lessons from college, I'm going to just write this word down because I forgot to write it down before and I don't want to forget. In college, the two other lessons, besides this idea that practicality was the leading reason to design anything, and finding a better use for something, that was one thought that I had to kind of unlearn and relearn. There were two other thoughts that I wanted to talk about a lot, and we'll talk about next time. We'll talk about chaos and the function of brainstorming, because this really ties into a lot of the language of revelation and how we get there, and what role does chaos play, what role does order play. And I just have so many thoughts about that as we go forward. So both from like ancient tradition, religious perspective to art perspective, modern art, traditional art, like all of these things, these principles have tied in. And when I was in school, I was taught over and over and over again that in order to be a really good designer, you have to love chaos. And I was the only one in my whole design program who, I mean, I would just look around the room and everybody's desks would just look like a bomb had gone off. And I'm not saying that to criticize them. They were hilarious, funny, spontaneous people. I loved being around them. They were awesome. And they were really good friends, but man, like there was no order to their desk. There was no rhyme or reason to where they put things. And one guy lost his finger. He cut his finger off on the machines in school because he just wasn't paying attention, you know, and I struggle paying attention too, but I am still really, really orderly and organized. So there was a lot of chaos in my department. And I remember feeling really out of place just for the simple fact that my desk was like neat as a pin. And I had all my pencils lined up in a row, and my little gummy eraser was like molded into like a perfect sphere. And I mean, like everything was orderly on my desk, and I felt so out of place. And I had to learn a lot about order and chaos, especially coming from this design program where chaos was like, it was a virtue. It was extolled as a virtue. So we'll talk about that next time. And then in the last class, we're going to talk about this idea of originality and newness and how that relates to true creativity. So if you guys have any other questions, if you ladies have any other questions about the process of creativity or creation, or how to be more creative, shoot those in the comments here or at any time, because this is oh, Marley says, I thought you were going to say he cut off his finger and got lost in the stuff on his desk. No, he found the finger. He took it to the hospital. They tried to sew it back on. It didn't work. So he just had a stubby finger for the rest of the years that we were there as students together. But oh my goodness. Yeah, it was a chaotic, crazy, fun group of people. But we'll talk about chaos and order and how that ties into beauty and creativity the next time. So, and then the time after that, newness and originality. It's almost like we just have this cult of newness. Everything has to be new and creative, and it has to change the world. And I used to think that that was synonymous with creativity. So we'll talk about that quite a bit too on the last time. So any other questions before we sign off? It's 3. We have just a few minutes left.
I'm going to say it's really helpful as you're talking about all of the things that you are. Like as you're talking, it just sounds so normal. Like it sounds so natural. But a lot of the things, but it's stuff that needs to be re-talked about to help us to, I guess I can't speak for everybody else, but helps me to be able to recognize that it's okay to like have order in art, or to just like to take time to do art projects, and being able to just all of the things, all of the things. The practical is, it has its purpose, but art does bring a lot of joy and it brings a lot of happiness. And I don't know, just I guess being taught these things kind of reteaches me that it's okay. Gives me that permission that it's okay.
Yes. Not only okay, but maybe even necessary.
Oh, for sure.
That's the little
Necessary.
reset button, right? To take time to create something and to try and make something pretty. You just feel so much better when you're done, right?
Mhm.
Thank you for sharing. Appreciate that, Jennifer.
I think I've learned a lot from Marlene about creation being an expression. And it makes sense that there are those of us who are chaotic, and there are those of us who are more calm and settled. And that whatever we create in whatever its form really is an expression of what's inside of us. And and that can change. I'm sure you've seen that happen in your art and your life, Natalie, as you do,
Absolutely.
your experience changes. And
Absolutely. I think that's why I loved the definition of plain so much when I looked it up. It's just frank and honest, and it's without like fake artificial embellishment, it's just, this is where I am and who I am right now. And that's all that matters.
yeah. And I think we're good at knowing what's authentic. Even little kids know what's authentic and what's not. Of course, AI might screw us over a little bit, but I mean, we recognize, when somebody is being true to who they are.
Yeah. That was actually one thing that my teacher taught me, my painting mentor, William Whitaker. He's not really well known by a lot of people. He did do some portrait paintings of like apostles and things, but that's about all he ever did for the church. Most of what he did was figure work, and he just would have women, and they were beautiful women, and he would paint them. He'd have these beautiful textures and cloth, and he was just wonderful. He's one of the very, very few realist figure painters. There were probably, he said when he was young, there were only like 3. And now he can see more and more and more students are coming up. So he sees the shift that people are starting to return to a love of things that are beautiful. But one of the lessons that he taught me was exactly what you said, Marley. Like when he said, as you grow as an artist, when you start in the beginning, you are more amateur. But he said, if you really are sincere and you're trying to communicate something beautiful and lovely in your own heart and share that with somebody else, he said, people will feel it. He said, every original work of art has a spiritual quality to it. And they will be drawn towards the spiritual quality of your work before they will be drawn to something that maybe is more technically well executed by somebody else, but isn't from their heart. It lacks that. It lacks the sincerity and the testimony and the intention. And he says that really does come across. So he said, so never be afraid of where you are in your developmental journey as an artist, because what you're trying to convey will come through. That spiritual quality will come through no matter where your talent is. So whatever your art medium is, whatever your preferred way of creating, remember that too, that you don't have to get it right. You don't have to get it perfect. You don't have to have this pressure of like, oh, I wish I knew how to mix that right color or play that right note. I'm always sharp on, on my A sharp or whatever. It's part of the process, and people can still feel your intention and your spirit through whatever it is that you create, regardless of where you are in your skill progression. So
Natalie,
I have
thank
a friend. Oh, sorry, I was just gonna say one part. I have a friend that she doesn't feel like the direction that she should focus on is spiritual at all, like religious or anything, but she feels like fantasy paintings are what she is drawn to. When I see her artwork, I see light. I see light coming out of the images that she shares. And so it's fascinating to see her testimony being shared through something that's not religious artwork, but there's light coming out of fairies and just stuff like that. Anyway.
Well, and fairies and stories and storytelling is all its own art as well. And a lot of times the symbolism that is in fairy tales, and like you talked about the light, all of it points to religion ultimately. Like there's nothing that's only temporal, only physical, only practical. Everything has some kind of spiritual dimension to it. So yes, she can still share subtly or symbolically her light through her work, even if it is appearing to be something fantasy. I mean, Narnia is fantasy, but it's super clear that C.S. Lewis is sharing something of his spirit with our spirit. What were you going to say, Marley?
I was going to say thank you. Thank you for this presentation today and for getting us thinking and talking with each other about beauty and creativity, and just have lots of new ideas kind of bouncing around in my mind and heart. So thank you. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Very welcome.
When we meet again, will it be Thanksgiving-ish time? Do you remember when that is?
Let me double check my calendar. Just
it's all good. Oh, November 18th. I can see. Yeah. November 18th, everybody.
So that'll still be a week before Thanksgiving. So we'll be okay. Conflict with the holiday there.
I just meant we'll be thinking about Thanksgiving. I'm not even going there yet, but that's where we'll be then. We'll be in the thick of it.
We will be in the preparation of Thanksgiving thick of it for sure.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day and keep the conversation going in the comments. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time. Or before on Mothers of Influence and chatting, and you gals are all so wonderful. Thank you.